Welcome to Sikorski's Thinkabouts. I'm your host, Laura Sikorski, and our show has been on the Daily Blue since September 8th, and we are extremely excited about it. The purpose of our show is to talk about call centers and customer care centers and their operational and technology likes or dislikes. Our guests usually come in with predefined subjects and topics that they'd like to talk about, and we certainly are excited about that because we are getting a lot of views. And today, I'm very excited, is a good friend. I know I always have good friends, but that's a good thing, right? Susan A. Hayes, and I'll tell you the story some other time about why we differentiate with Susan A. Hayes. And she is a business executive with over 30 years experience, at Verizon. She currently supports the region's president, and I'm very excited because Susan was very influential in two very important Verizon initiatives. One was the retail sales project, where there were over 300 retail outlets selling Verizon product and services, and where she had an extreme influence on understanding the customer and giving Verizon, important data to go after those type of customers. The second was she was the Director of Government and External Affairs of New York, and this was all government relational programs, and where she had to be an influencer and talking about them. Plus, I think this is also exciting, she was part and involved in the initial efforts of FiOS TV. She is a 2010 and 2012 Top 50 Businesswomen of Long Island, and we are so excited to have you on the show. Our topic today is getting results by building relationships. And I thought that Susan was a great person to do that. She prepared some talking points for us this morning, and we're going to talk about particularly good influencing skills are essential to build relationships. So let's talk about this slide. What does it really mean?
Yeah, what this means is in a variety of situations you have to get results, whether it's in business, in your personal life. It's about really focusing on what do you want to achieve and how are you going to achieve those results collectively with someone else. Typically we don't operate in a vacuum, and so the whole point about building relationships is really the interdependencies on others and how you get the results that you're looking for. And so whether you're looking for a support in a meeting, you've got a good concept and an idea, and you need peers to support you. That's one way of looking at it. Whether you want to be included in a decision-making process, whether you want to be, part of the group that's making those decisions to move your business forward or to impact your customers. And last is on the customer life cycle. As you mentioned, I used to run the retail organization, and so understanding the customer's perspective and building that relationship with the customer, whether it's the customer service aspect, the sales aspect, and the overall brand. And so, there's relationships in many areas, but what I'm going to focus on today is how you can do that one-on-one.
Can we the comment that you made about customer and customer relationships, what have you found in working with the customer, the most difficult thing to build a relationship on? I mean, what is it that they, care about?
Well, what they care about are how your product or service are going to impact them, whether it's through the cost, whether it's through the quality, and ultimately, the service, and what is that product to them, and how is it going to enable them in their life to really move, to move forward. Cost is, of course, though, is always a big factor. It's that value proposition, right? So it's the whole, what's in it for me and what's it going to cost me.
I was just going to say that because a lot of times you buy product based on or services, what am I going to get out of it? And that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. But the brand and the thought around that product is also very important. And so back to, do you have a relationship, with that brand? Is that a brand that you can rely upon? And some of the things that we'll talk about, is it a credible brand? Is it credible? You know, does it have long-term sustainability, things like that.
You know, and also, you know, my tagline here has always been think like a customer, and I think Verizon and all of your work in the past has always had the customer in mind when they're developing a product or a service.
You know, absolutely. And so, sorry.
Go ahead.
No. So one of the things, you know, there were really three key areas. You know, this is really about the importance of focusing on others, right? And what do I mean by focusing on others? You know, that is basically improving that relationship with other individuals, because as I mentioned before, we don't really operate in a vacuum. It's about give and take. It's really the law of reciprocity. It's not about take only when you think of influencing, right? It's not about what can I get from you. It's how can we help each other to move towards that goal? Because typically a lot of people have, you know, certain common interests in mind, again, at business as well.
Well, and you find, especially if you and I both do networking, and you know the networker who just wants to take, and they never give back, you know, whereas when you're an influencer, it's the type of thing where you read an article and you go, oh, I know Susan would like that article. I'm going to send that to her. So I understand that one-on-one relationship that you're speaking about. It's really important.
Right, absolutely. It's really returning favors. You know, that's
great
just,
concept.
You know, just a very it's really as simple as returning favors. You know, how can I help you? And maybe one day I'll need a favor back. Maybe I won't. You know, I operate with how can I help you, and that's where I move forward. And if I ever need the favor, you know, hopefully if I ever have to ask, you know, I can get that favor returned.
Sure.
But you know, good influencers, as you just mentioned here, you know, they really approach others as equals, right? So, you know, it's back to, you know, whether it doesn't matter in the organizational hierarchy, whether it's in corporate or in a small business, you know, you're treating everyone the way you want to be treated, or even better than the way you want to be treated. It's just seeing others as equal. As I mentioned before, that whole identify the common ground. You know, what are the organizational goals? And so, you know, good influencers understand how to communicate those organizational goals so that people can understand them, you know, put them in simple terms, and, you know, ideally, you know, you can kind of move towards them. I know when I was working, I did a lot of franchise work years ago with trying to get communities and organizations around FiOS TV. You know, I went in there with, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and how to approach change my approach, you know, as we went along, because, you know, the way I saw it necessarily wasn't the way the municipality saw it.
Sure.
So, you know, it's kind of like you have to figure that out. So, and generally good influencers, you know, they're well-liked. And why is that? What do I mean well-liked? It's because they're friendly, they're cooperative, you know, they're seen as someone that's trying to, you know, to be helpful, you know, helpful to one another.
And then, you know, in the customer care call center field, I mean, that's important for coaching.
Absolutely.
When you have a manager or a supervisor who takes you on the side and, you know, if you have said something wrong or need some coaching on an aspect of your call, they do it in a way that doesn't say, you bad person, you did it wrong.
Absolutely.
They influence you and say, next time I would suggest that you do it that way. And that's very important, especially in customer care, because you need to demonstrate as the next words are, that you're a team player and you're helping your employees.
Absolutely. You know, I think some of the benefits of the influencing skills, like if you have good influencing skills, is first, you know, understand that you can get your own work done selfishly faster. There's an interdependence that's necessary. And so in my current role, you know, if there are reports or things that have to be compiled on a wide perspective, you know, throughout the state or the Northeast area, you know, you've got to get something done really quickly. And that's important, you know, to be able to have folks understand the reasons why, get them back, and be able to turn it around, which helps then eventually reduce your own stress and conflict, right? Because, you know, stress and conflict exists in a daily basis, you know, and how we manage that is, you know, up to us as individuals. But again, when you frame ideas as a solution, you know, you can kind of help move your projects and, you know, your activities along, hopefully in a quicker way.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, when you use the words that you have to, whatever you're doing and working with the president of the area, you know, how do you make sure that what you're putting in the written word or the visual is truly understood? And that's a skill. That really is a skill.
It's a skill, and the old keep it simple is the thing that really works best on that. You know, and we just talked about being a team player, which you mentioned before, which is really just important, because it's really acknowledging others' priorities. My priorities are not necessarily the priorities that perhaps our today our field managers are facing, right? You know, I've got a, in this role is it's a staff function. When I did have, large teams, and when I had all of my stores, that was about delivering results. That was about delivering sales.
Right, what's the bottom line? I want that.
Right, it was like, how are we doing? Where are we at?
Right.
What are customers thinking? What are customers thinking about all of my different locations? So it's a little different. You have to acknowledge other folks' priorities. And in the end, hopefully you can become, a really better negotiator to figure out that whole win-win. Okay.
So how do you make sure that the relationship lasts? That's always been a tough one. You meet people day in and day out, and you have in your mind, you say, oh, maybe I'd like to meet that person, but by the time you build a relationship, it takes 6 or 7 times before you feel comfortable with that person. So let's talk about a good relationship.
Okay. Well, think about it from this way. You just mentioned a good relationship really, what I'm saying is, has more influence. Would you rather work with a grumpy person or a happy person? Right?
Obviously happy.
Right?
Right.
Well, a happy mo, right?
Right.
You have to think along those lines for your being. It's interesting. My husband actually looked over some of my slides, and he said, "Oh, you should do this at my workplace." Not that any of them are going to be listening,
right,
but the idea is that how are you at work, and that's about really still getting better support, moving forward with folks. But what I say on some of these slides right now is really to develop some of those relationships, is really to to ask questions, to listen to folks, to respect their ideas, not overtalk them. Which I did just a little while ago.
I do it all the time. Don't worry about it.
But don't get your point across first. Sit back and listen. But those are the things about really showing, just demonstrating, interest in others as well. Being respectful. Well, what does that mean? Being respectful. Being encouraging. Just being polite. Just some simple.
Basic 101 that so many people in business forget today. And when you're, again, going back to the call center or the customer care center, when you're stressed because that person is calling and nasty on the phone and so forth, it really is a good thing that when a supervisor comes over and says, you did a really great job on that call.
Absolutely.
Or, they whisper in your ear, they've been listening to you and say, great job, you handled that customer very well. And that is extremely, let's put it, very important in the customer care industry. So,
no, absolutely. In fact, I had all of the region's call centers for Verizon at some times. I've overseen call centers, multiple call centers, and one of the things.
About how many people were in those call centers? How many hundreds of people? Right?
Oh, hundreds. I mean, I had over 1,200 people at one point.
Wow.
In the organization, and so. Being positive, right, with all levels of employees, that's back to, I think I mentioned it before, just really valuing employees for who they are. That made all the difference. I was fortunate. I had some of the best, actually I had 2 who were recognized throughout the country as being the top call centers. And I happened to work, my physical office was in one of them. When folks would be on the floor, it didn't matter the levels, you're
Right.
walking the halls. We are all humans, right? We are all human, and you need to respect people. And I would expected that same level of respect as well, and that we didn't have any conflicts and things along those lines. But it's all how you treat, it's all how you treat people. It's all how you treat people. But being positive, is sometimes is a challenge. To be cheerful, right?
Yeah.
I say be cheerful, but you know what? back to when I started.
Yes.
Should I work with a happy person or a grumpy person? Right,
right. But
so,
you know, but being positive means a lot, especially in a call center as an example, or it could be any retail store. You know, you just have to make sure that you have a nice look on your face and not look grumpy, because nobody's going to buy from you in a brick and mortar, and your voice is going to come through on the phone that you're why am I even answering the phone type of a thing.
Absolutely.
So
no, absolutely.
So how do you build credibility? You know, I'm a big person is how you are received is how you are perceived. And, you know, a lot of people in the world don't understand that if you look like you don't want to be bothered, that's the impression you're going to give. So let's spend a little time on how do I build credibility.
Right. Well, to get results, you know, first off, credibility is built over time. I think you mentioned that before. You really have to understand whether are you seen as credible, and so you know how you judge how others perceive you. Obviously, at times it depends on the results that you're getting as well from others. Because it is a time, you have instantaneous snap decisions on folks, but building this over time in the various areas of your life, right? So, you know, you could have credibility at work, but you could be involved in external organizations and may not have that level of credibility, or you may have, you know, something even just with your own kids, you know, soccer teams or basketball teams, you know, it's back to the different circles that we all have in life. But in business, you know, one of the ways, you know, to build that credibility, the first way is really just honoring confidentiality. And when I say confidentiality, that is that, you know, when people speak to you about things in confidence, you hold them in confidence. You know, oftentimes people like to be in the know, and especially in this gossip girl era that we sometimes are in. You know, it's like, you know something, you share it, right? You know, everything is very, very quick. We're quick to share. But, you know, in today's day, you know, if you could hold on to information, your opinions can matter, because you're trusted. You're really seen as a trusted source. That's just one way to.
But that's a very valid point, because many times in consulting, I'll interview various members of staff, and I'll explain to them what you're saying to me is confidential. I will not say that Joan said this and Harry said that, because it doesn't help the organization in finding out if they need to have changes made in their structure, operationally, or whatever. So I really think honoring confidentiality is so very important, because I've been in situations where they'll say, oh, this is extremely confidential, and I keep that confidentiality, but have been burned when I say something and say, would you please keep this confidential, and the next thing I know, it's out on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. Not as bad, it's not bad stuff, but you know, it's something that I said that I think where the industry is going, as an example, and it just kind of backfires a little bit. But deliver on promises.
Do what you say you're going to do. It is life is as simple as that. And many times I think that people say things and they just don't follow up with the do. I know we're all guilty of it at times, but really to be able to, you know, to deliver, first off, you know, get things done. But when you think about promises, you almost want to over-deliver on that promise. You know, if you say you're going to do something for someone, we'll do it really well and do a great job, and that's really, you know, over-delivering.
But that's spot on. I mean, that's what we all should do, and that's so. And yet, I know, because some people don't do it, right? It's crazy. Well, yeah, we all know people that.
And we all. I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty.
Every
of it
once
times.
in a while, it's like, oh, okay, you know, I don't want to do it, but. Yeah. We have to remember that that's important.
Absolutely, absolutely. The next one I'd say here is really accept responsibility. And this is actually in three areas. When I say accept responsibility, first off, it's about accept responsibility for your actions, but also including your mistakes. Because no one is perfect. And so this is about, again, building your credibility. Right. Now, you make a mistake, make sure you acknowledge that. whatever the mistake is, don't just brush them aside,
Yeah,
because people know if you're making mistakes.
It's my error. I made a mistake.
It's exactly right. Also, acknowledge the work of others. That's really about not accepting the responsibility or the accountability that's your work. Acknowledge that work of others. I work on teams. All my work for 30 years has been very team-based. And in order to move forward, I have had to have the support and reliance on other people. Sure. And it doesn't make it bad that if I take their work, that's just not seen as really basically building credibility.
There are so many things that you've seen, or we've all seen in our careers, where you give information and you're never said, oh, and so and so said this, and we thank her or him for that.
Right.
So believe it or not, we're almost out of time.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
So let's kind of, think about, and I did not interrupt you, but you did use our famous phrase, and when you were speaking, think about, when we were having dialogue. Yeah, so that was good. But, let's for a minute or so, let's kind of just recap.
Sure.
So, if you could.
Sure, absolutely. And this is really the crux of everything that I've talked about so far. So if you're really looking for results, being a great influencer can impact the bottom line of a business. The bottom line about a business is about caring for customers, whoever those customers are, and being an influencer and understanding where those customers are coming from is really important. The next is better relationships, leverage better business opportunities. It's all, again, about the customer. It depends on how you want to define a customer, but, if you have better relationships with others, they can be your voice for a customer as well. And then the last think about is customers' value. An individual's interaction, right, can really speak about the credibility and impact your business brand. And so, customers' interaction with you, whatever you're representing, is going to be the face of that business, for that particular customer. Again, dependent upon the situation, the area, and so forth.
But it could also be your voice.
Absolutely.
I know that voice. And sometimes people on the radio, and you're in the store, and you say, "Oh, I know that voice."
Absolutely.
So, well, as I said, we're just about out of time, but we do have a Twitter question for Susan. All right, and it's, how do you turn a relationship around that has really gone south? They just bad. Can you salvage that relationship? How do you do that?
Well, I think it depends on the nature of it in the first place. If it's with a customer, you have to acknowledge that it's gone bad, right? And so that's the first piece of it, is to acknowledge it, not to ignore it. So if you acknowledge it, especially if you can one-on-one with that customer, right? If you acknowledge it, allow me the time to turn this around. I know that we've harmed you in some way, and it's paraphrasing whatever the situation is, but you know what? We didn't handle that well. Can you give me a second chance? And for 9 times out of 10, most people will give you a second chance, because no one's perfect, and everyone makes mistakes as well. So that's it.
Well, this has been great, Susan. Thank you
so
so much
welcome.
for coming on the show and sharing all your expertise.
It's been my pleasure.
And information about a little bit about Verizon and your history there. That was exciting. So next week's show, November 24th, our guest is going to be Corinne Caro, President of Blue Chip Marketing and the Daily Blue, and she's going to be speaking about brand loyalty, and that's something Susan has hit on during our show today. So with that, stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Have a great afternoon.